Okay, we've got to move ahead on Genesis. We're getting close to the end. How can the beginning get close to the end? Well, we're trying to figure that out. I've had a suggestion that we go to New Testament and pick up a gospel, and had John recommended, and then had another recommendation that since Paul established the church, go into Paul's original letters and get a feel for Paul and his influence. I don't know how much did Muzan deal with that, or did he just go verse by verse all the way through? But 4 or 5 times. Right. Took 9 years. So I guess I'm following in those slow footsteps of taking a long time to wade through all of this. But let's move on. Starting, I'll read the whole chapter 45, and then we'll look at what it says. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all those who stood by him. His brothers have gathered, and he just heard from the story about how their father could not bear to lose another son. And then Joseph could no longer control himself before those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Send everyone away from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Sachs, when he translated that, they heard about it, didn't actually hear it in Pharaoh's house. But anyway, Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, so dismayed were they at his presence. And then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." And they came closer, and he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold." I don't think he put the emphasis on you, but we will. "Whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you that sent me here, but God, and He made me a father to Pharaoh." And the commentaries say that's a real common kind of phrase. The Lord of for the visor, the one who holds the office Joseph held. "The Lord of all his house, and ruler over all of the land of Egypt. Hurry up and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not delay. You shall settle in the land of Goshen.'" And now notice at this point it is Joseph who's saying, "Go tell my father, bring him here, and I'm going to decide where you will settle. You will settle in the land of Goshen, so you shall be near me, you and your children's children, as well as your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. And I will provide for you there, since there are 5 more years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have will not come to poverty. And now your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see that it is my own mouth that speaks to you. You must tell my father how greatly I am honored in Egypt, and all that you have seen. Hurry and bring my father down here." And then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, while Benjamin wept upon his neck. I guess that's a description that said they were embraced. We don't use that expression anymore, falling on each other's neck. "And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them, and after that his brothers talked with him." So they don't talk to him for all this time. And when the report was heard in Pharaoh's house, Joseph's brothers have come. Pharaoh and his servants were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this. Load your animals and go back to the land of Canaan. Take your father and your households and come to me. See, in the first section, it was Joseph who said, go tell my father, bring him back to me. And now in this section, it is Pharaoh who is saying, go do this and come back to me, so that I may give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you may enjoy the fat of the land. You are further charged to say, do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones, for your wives, and bring your father and come. Give no thought to your possessions, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. So the sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gives them wagons, according to the instruction of Pharaoh, and he gave them provisions for the journey. To each one of them he gave a set of garments. But to Benjamin he gives 300 pieces of silver and 5 sets of garments. He's still playing favorites here with Benjamin. To his father he sent the following: 10 donkeys loaded with good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and provisions for his father on the journey. And then he sent his brothers on the way, and as they were leaving he said to them, do not quarrel along the way. So why would they quarrel? Anyway, he knows that they tried to blame each other and all that in the past. So they went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, and they told him, Joseph is still alive. He is even ruler over all the land of Egypt. And he was stunned. He could not believe them. But when they told him all the words of Joseph that he had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father revived. Israel said, enough, my son Joseph is still alive. I must go and see him before I die. Interesting dynamic there. So the revelation of Joseph's identity to his brothers and that emotional outpouring of Joseph's pent-up feelings are described in this section. And this section, as we kind of showed, is a weaving of, or a braiding together of the Yahwist and the Elohist versions of the story, and it gets kind of repetitious in a way. Joseph wants the brothers to hurry home and to bring Jacob or Israel to Egypt. A practical matter, if Joseph wonders about Jacob's health and if he's even alive, if he wants to see him before he dies, why didn't Joseph just saddle up and get over there and see his dad? Why didn't he go? And stopping to think, if he's wondering, is he still alive? How is his health? He's reckoning he's in later life and he may not be in good health. The journey, the stress of the journey might just kill him. So why didn't Joseph go himself? Well, of course, the end goal is to get Jacob and the whole clan down to Goshen to survive the famine. But it seems like time is of essence here. But anyway, just a question to ponder. If we were rabbis writing the Midrash, we might spend days arguing about why. But anyway, Vaughter points out to us that the expression of divine influence on the chain of events is reinforced by the actual words in that text. God sent me ahead of you to ensure a remnant on earth and to save your lives in an extraordinary deliverance. Remnant and deliverance are key words that are repeated throughout the salvation, and particularly in the Old Testament. We say today about things, well, it's a God thing. But in this, the phrase in the olden days would use words of remnant and deliverance. But usually kind of thing that happens in our life where coincidences just seem to fall into place, and we're really blessed, and we're lucky. In fact, Karen and I were talking about that. She had to go. Her mother is getting weaker and weaker, and her health isn't good, and been going back and forth to doctors. And Karen is feeling like she needs to go over and spend time with her every evening so that she will make sure she will eat, because she's lost. When we moved her a year ago, she was like at about 129 pounds, and now she's down to 102. And, what's going on here? But anyway, when Karen was heading home, after the thunderstorm, she sees in the sky this beautiful double rainbow. How many of you, some of you saw it? That was really neat. And it was complete. A lot of times when we see those, we see about half or three quarters, because on the other side, the cloud or the rain hadn't fallen to show us the rainbow. But this was all the way across. It was just perfect and complete. And so I said to her, well, God was smiling on your good gesture to go see about your mother. You received a blessing for doing a good thing. And so she did receive a blessing because she did do a good thing and was leaving at just the right time. Now, some people would say, well, God created all these things to happen just because of me. No, God doesn't do things that way. But we can thank God for creating a world that has beautiful rainbows, and move the rain schedule out so that we needed another rain, and it came. And that if we do things in the right way, a lot of times we'll be in the right place at the right time to receive a blessing. Anyway, but when the remnant and the deliverance words are used, they're not about an individual, but a remnant is for the people. That there will be enough survivors that the people will survive as a people. And in the grand scheme of things in world history, 4,000 or 6,000 years of a people's life of faith in that relationship with God, this story is saying that what's happening at that point is a part of that grand scheme. And it is a God thing, a deliverance. But we do hear again that Joseph has excused his brothers of guilt and blame. Doesn't actually use the words of forgiveness, but tries to lift from them that sense of guilt and shame so that the relationship can be reestablished. But the listeners to the story will hear those themes by those words, deliverance and remnant. Now, the way it's stated, both the remnant and the deliverance, that these are consecrated terms in the Old Testament theological language, and they designate the effect of divine intervention into Israel and the history. And it's preserving those kind of ideas. When the rabbi, I can't remember which one he used a word that whenever listening to Scripture, if you would hear a word, what do you call that? Bong, gong, bong, something. It was an alarm or a bell that's supposed to ring in our brain that tells us, pay attention, pay attention. This means something. And as we focus and pay attention, then we see this is a repeated word that's indicating to us a theme that's running through the story. And so it has more power and meaning to us. Anyway, as we move on, it's interesting to hear a small or maybe a large contradiction. Joseph sent all of the Egyptian servants away so that his reunion with his brothers would be private, we assume. But it's not private. We hear his wailings and his cries are heard outside, and people tell the story. Joseph didn't tell Pharaoh, but the word got out and got to Pharaoh. either because Joseph's living quarters were like a condominium within the condominium complex of the palace, or word of mouth got the word to Pharaoh's court, and he becomes aware, and then he enters into the story. But we're reminded that there are no personal characteristics or descriptions, so that Pharaoh kind of stays minimized and in the background. This is about Joseph. Pharaoh is just part of the landscape. He's not a character, a strong character in the story. But anyway, he becomes aware, and Joseph is, or his care or concern for Joseph and the honor of Joseph seems to be extended to his family. And so as these two storylines from different sources get blended, but in the E version, Pharaoh sort of takes charge in sending Joseph's brothers away to retrieve Jacob Israel, and it's Pharaoh who's giving them the choicest real estate in all of Egypt. But at this point in the time, it's not a huge immigration of hundreds and thousands of people like we see in the Sudan and Africa. This is, when we get a little farther, it's 70 male folks are named, or 70 key folks in the family are named who go down. So that's a small number when you're talking about a huge nation that takes up so much real estate. Now, the details of the gifts and the provisions are interesting. The wagons mentioned. Now, when you hear the word wagons, he gives them wagons. In your mind, what do you picture? The covered wagons of the Old West? Well, kind of actually they say they're probably two-wheeled carts, and they would have a cover over them. But, when I first read wagons, my experience with wagons, they have 4 wheels. And if it doesn't have 4 wheels, we give it another name. We call it a cart or a rickshaw or something else. But anyway, Professor Vaughter suggests that that's really not a 4-wheeled wagon. It's more like a 2-wheeled cart, which means it's going to tip over unless someone is pulling it. It's an ox, a goat, a person, someone's pulling it along and holding it from flipping over. It's also noted that Joseph again shows this special favoritism to his brother Benjamin. It is all this silver, and then the 5 is mentioned again, 5 times the amount. And we're told that 5 had some special significance, some symbolic meaning, but we don't know what it is. Nobody explained it. It was common knowledge and understanding at the time, but it hadn't been passed on to us. But anyway, he does give special attention to Benjamin. And then Professor von Rad explains that the silver that is given is not stamped coins. It's not round coins, but there was a bar of silver, and they would chop off little pieces that had a weight. And so the shekel was a weight of silver, and so whatever that weight was the value for the exchange. It's not quite as precise as today's measurements, but they tried to get it pretty close. But why does Joseph give him a new set of clothes? Why would he do that? Well, I think you're on the right track. The scholars don't explain it. But when we skip all the way over to the last verse of the next chapter, 46:34, when Joseph is coaching his brothers on how to approach Pharaoh and to tell them that they are herders of livestock, but do not use the word shepherd, for shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. But then the note at that point says there's no corroborating evidence that this was actually true. at the time, but it's in the text. So if he wants to give them new sets of clothes, and then we've got shepherds are abomination to the Egyptians, so to make them more presentable and to, have them, because remember Joseph and the Egyptians were clean shaven, and the brothers were all hairy and bearded and long hair and dirty and smelly and had clothes that identified them as something unacceptable. Yeah. Possibly. The farmers and the ranchers kind of deal. There may have been competition for those parts of real estate and what worked well and what didn't for different varieties of livestock. So, that could have been it. But I'm suspecting that there's a hint here of Joseph is embarrassed by how they look. And so he wants them to get cleaned up and presentable for when they come back with their families and are going to settle there. So hurry and get out of here, but I'm going to give you some clean clothes to wear when you come back so you look presentable. Anyway, it's not in the text. It doesn't explain, but if we know human nature and read some of that into the story, it might give us some clues about that. Now, if it didn't have some significance or importance, it wouldn't be in there. The unimportant stuff gets not repeated and it gets called out by the different editors. Well, anyway, Conrad mentions mentions the reality for the brothers when they go home to tell Joseph, Israel, their dad, that Joseph is alive and he has risen to great power and authority in Egypt, and he says he can't believe them. Why can't he believe them? Well, it's been 22 years that he has the horrible, shocking memory of the bloody robe and was led to believe. Doesn't say the brothers told him this, but he jumped to the conclusion that a wild animal had killed his son and had devoured him, had eaten him up. So he's had that image and that idea in his mind, and now they're coming and telling him, we found him, he's alive. He's down in Egypt. Well, the question will inevitably arise, well, how can that be? How did he get down there? You boys led me to believe he was dead. Now you're telling me he's alive. Well, the story doesn't explain it or tell us about it, but the brothers would have to confess to their dad the whole story. It would have to come out sooner or later. And that would be a very dramatic scene if it were described. But it's not mentioned. It's not described in the narrative. So we would presume that as far as the narrator is concerned, all is forgiven and everything turned out well because God's hand was guiding this event, as Joseph had explained so carefully earlier in the text, that it had a blessed ending. So there's no need to dig up all that hurt feeling and stuff and leave that impression on your mind as we move ahead with the story. But it's curious, though, remembering how Jacob will be so unforgiving of Reuben and Simeon and Levi at that final blessing in chapter 49. And as we reviewed that, and that Joseph would see that as, maybe one of the reasons he didn't go tell his dad that he was alive. He thought his father was mad at him and had on purpose sent him to the brothers. We had that thing that Rabbi Sachs had suggested. So it's reasonable to expect that Jacob could get very, very angry at the brothers for what they had done once they confess. He would be very upset over their treachery and the grief that they had laid upon him for these 22 years. But again, as I say, we presume the narrator wants the idea and image in the listener's mind to not go there, but to be on the understanding of God's hand has been guiding this all along, and this is a part of the divine plan to get the children of Israel down to Egypt. Now, when I'm speaking off the cuff about Old Testament things and the history of Israel and so forth, the defining moment for the children of Israel in their history to come to know this very special God, who is not a local God, who's, a tree god or a mountain god, but the God of the universe, for them to truly come to meet this God and understand this God is wrapped up in the Exodus. God is the God, our God, Yahweh or Jehovah or the Lord is the God who frees slaves. That's the most important characteristic. This God has the power to free slaves, and this God's compassion and love is what motivates this God to free slaves, to care about the marginalized, the disenfranchised, and want good for them. Well, if that is the event, how in the world did they get down to Egypt in the first place? Well, Genesis' story is explaining that, getting up to the Exodus, that defining historical salvation moment that defines who these people are and who their God is. And so, if we remember that, then we'll kind of see the motive of the narrative for leaving stuff out or emphasizing other things. Possibility of...
They had not been rescued to Egypt.
Okay, if they hadn't gotten down to Egypt...
They would have perished in the famine.
Oh, yeah.
That would have been the end of it.
Oh, yeah.
In the first
Right.
That there was a purpose serving them being brought to Egypt.
Oh, yeah, it was a critical part, and that's why, that word rescue and remnant, that there would be a remnant, that God, in spite of the bad things that come along, God will be here and will help us survive. And there will be a salvation of at least a remnant who can return or survive. But yeah, if it wasn't for this event, then they probably would have perished in the great famine. Anyway, so this is God's doing, and divine providence is at work here. Now we move on to chapter 46, because there's not a whole lot of intrigue in there to spend more time on that. 45. When Israel, or Jacob, set out on his journey with all that he had, and he came to Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, "Jacob, Jacob." And he said, "Here I am." And then God said, "I am God." Now this is translated. We don't know what word God used to name himself, herself, itself. But it says, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. I myself will go down with you to Egypt." So here's a God who is not tied to a geographical location. "I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again. And Joseph's own hand shall close your eyes," which means you'll go down there, you will die, Joseph will do the burial rites. "Then Jacob set out from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob, their little ones, and their wives, in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock and goods that they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and they came to Egypt. Jacob and all of his offspring with him, his sons' sons with him, and his daughters, and his sons' daughters, and his offspring he brought with him into Egypt. Now, these are the names of Israelites, Jacob and his offspring, who came to Egypt." Now it had daughters and daughters-in-law and granddaughters and grandsons and so forth. But now we're only going to list some of them. Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and the children of Reuben, Hanok, Palu, Herzon, Carmi. The children of Simeon, Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. Whoops. He had a Canaanite wife, one son. Doesn't tell us who the mother of the other sons were. The children of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. The children of Judah, Onan, who had died, and it'll tell us that in a minute, and Shea, and Perez, and Zerah, but and Onan died in the land of Canaan. And the children of Perez were Herzon and Hamuel. Children of Issachar, Tola, Huvah, Jasub, and Shimron. The children of Zebulun, Sered, Elon, and Jahiel. These are the sons of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob in Pada-aran, together with his daughter Dinah. In all his sons and his daughters numbered 33. The children of Gad, Ziphon, Haggai, Suni, Isban, Eri, Arodi, and Arai. The children of Asher, Ishma, Ishva, Ishvi, Beriah, and the sister Sarah. The children of Berah, Heber, and Malkiel. These are the children of Zilpah, who Laban gave to his daughter Leah, and these she bore to Jacob, 16 persons. The children of Jacob's wife Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. To Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore him. The children of Benjamin, Bela, Belcher, Ashver, Gera, Nahman, Ehi, Rosh, Muppin, Huppim, and Ard. That's a lot of children for a young man to have had already. These are the children of Rachel, who she bore to Jacob, 14 persons in all. The children of Dan, Hashem. The children of Naphtali, Jasreel, Guni, Jerhod, Silam. These are the children of Bilhah, whom Laban gave to his daughter Rachel, and these she bore to Jacob, 7 persons in all. Well, all the persons belonging to Jacob who came into Egypt, who were his own offspring, not including the wives of his sons, were 66 persons in all. And the children of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. Now, did you all add all those up? Well, I did. And it does add, the numbers they gave did add to 70, but I didn't count all the names and put numbers by them. Anyway, Israel sent Judah ahead. Now here Judah again takes a prominent role as a representative. Sent Judah ahead to Joseph to lead the way before him into Goshen. And when they came to the land of Goshen, Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to meet his father Israel in Goshen. He presented himself to him, fell on his neck, and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, I can die now, having seen for myself that you are still alive. And Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and he will say to him, my brothers and my father's household who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. The men are shepherds, for they have been keepers of livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. And when Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? You shall say, your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth even until now, both we and our ancestors, in order that you may settle in the land of Goshen, because all shepherds are abhorrent to the Egyptians. It seems a contradiction that Joseph is going to tell Pharaoh that his family are shepherds, but when they get there, don't say you are shepherds, say you are herders of livestock. Anyway, lots of puzzling things that are coming through the weaving of the different traditions. Some things are important in one and not in another. Jacob decides to go to Egypt, and he packs up and he starts the journey. but he stops in Beersheba to offer sacrifices to God. And he has the night visions and the communications from God that it's okay to go on down to Egypt. But he had already decided to go. He was on the way. So again, this is a strong example of the woven stories that in one, he decided to go, he's on the way, and then this other story has him needing to go talk to God first and to get the okay. Now, the other part of that is it is actually this call to go into Egypt does come from God in that story of he worships and he receives the night visions and God talks to him. Not only is it okay to abandon. See, Abraham has been led to the land of Canaan. They've gotten there, they're settled, and now they're leaving. Now that doesn't seem to be faithful to what God wants. So we've got to have God make it okay, and not only okay, but God is sending him. But with the sending is also the promise that God will bring them back. That God will bring them back. So this is still a part of God's salvation history. It's a part of keeping them alive so that they will be the remnant and will survive. But anyway, we've got deciding in Hebron and then deciding again at Beersheba. Now, the divine sanction does give them permission to leave the promised land. And so another part of that, to make it very dramatic with a God-given and a God revelation, is that these decisions you can't just make because something's more convenient. You don't just whimsically decide to go or stay or move around. This has to be God in control and God's command. You need the divine approval and divine calling. Now, the cultic nature of the worship connects Jacob with his father Isaac. Beersheba had been Isaac's dwelling place, and the style and description of this divine revelation we've seen in the past, the night dreams, and God speaking to Jacob. This is following the theme of how God communicates with Jacob. So it's keeping that thread very clear in the tapestry of the story. So unless you're a biblical scholar, you probably won't take time to calculate all the names and people, but we get another rehearsal of all the names, and it does add up to 70. But we're told that 70 is really just supposed to be a rounded number that means a whole lot of them went down there, because it wasn't 71 or 2 or 3, it's 70, a round number. But there are some who are detail people, and if the story is going to be correct, they have to go in and add up all the names and make sure it makes 70 so that it's consistent. Now, when we get to the point of Joseph, at the beginning, he had said he was the one who was calling, and he would have them settle in the land of Goshen, and he was going to take care of them. And then the Pharaoh line of the story enters in, and Pharaoh's giving orders. And then here at the end, the family has to be presented to Pharaoh. And so we have a return to a political reality of the day, is that Pharaoh is still the number one ruler of the land. And it is Pharaoh's decision about immigration policy. Ever think about this in terms of immigration policies, of who's allowed in and who's not allowed? And we have to have customs and check on people and do background checks to see. Because, as we've said before, when the brothers arrived, that Joseph pretended like he was worried about them being spies, that there were folks who would do reconnaissance and would try to infiltrate and then create an uprising. Anyway, so it's Pharaoh's decision on the immigration policy. So where will Joseph's family actually take up residence? Now, Von Rad says there's no strong evidence for the claim that shepherds were an abomination, but they were welcome. And this may be a way of Joseph telling his family, behave yourselves, act decently, do not create embarrassment for me, do not create problems for me and our family. Put on these good clothes, come, be respectful, use the most acceptable words. I've been listening to some lectures on memory and some interesting studies, and it gets into how suggestive our memory is. And they did a test, showed some folks a video of a car crash, a real short clip, turned it off, and then asked them to, after a while, gave some time, and then asked them, different ones, to remember the crash or an impact. And it was in a courtroom, a mock trial, a courtroom setting where the lawyer who was asking the witnesses to describe, and they would use different words. Some of them were rather mild, where the impact or the contact, and then others were when they plowed into the other car. Describe that. And when the ones reporting the stronger words influenced how they remembered, because when they used a mild word, they had asked about the broken glass. And when they used the mild word, they didn't really remember broken glass. But then when they used the powerful word, it shaped the memory. And a good more than half of the folks said, oh yes, I remember the glass. So they showed the video again, and there was no broken glass. But the suggestion of the powerful impact affected the recall of the memory. So, and we notice it in politics as people refer to an event. If you want to make it an event that's shameful for your opponent, you use really strong negative words. And if it's just an event, that just something happened, then you don't use those strong negative words, because you're trying to paint the image and present it in a context either acceptable or unacceptable. So Joseph here seems to be doing that in using the word, we are herders of livestock, which could mean cattlemen or shepherds, ranchers or farmers, so that the impression on Pharaoh's mind will be favorable and acceptable. And so anyway, we see those dynamics in the text. Well, we've gotten through 2 chapters today. We've got 47, 48, 49, 50, and then we'll be done. And then we'll have to decide where we're going next. Any questions or comments or remarks about this process of getting down there to go? Pharaoh? Well, that's one of the interesting things. We don't know. We assume that and want to believe this is accurate, detailed history because it is our Bible. But it isn't so. It's very generalized. As I've said, the Pharaoh isn't given really any characteristics. He's just a general Pharaoh. and it is really hard to locate. Scholars give different theories and ideas of which Pharaoh it might be, but part of that of the land of Goshen and the timeline that might be that the Pharaoh's residence was not in that part of Egypt at that time that this might have been. It would have been somewhere else. So the efforts to connect it with what we call extant history outside of the Bible history is very difficult. There are no extant records of these Israelites. There were slaves, but not a strong indication of Israelites or of this famine. There were famines, but not an indication that there was this Joseph who took charge and did all of this. Some have argued and suggested that, well, the Egyptians were so ashamed and embarrassed that their God lost the struggle with the God of Israel, that they just expunged all records. It didn't happen. They were never here. We don't have to tell the story of our disgrace. Makes sense. Could be. We know in politics, people like to lose records. I don't know what they did before they had shredders. I guess someone set fire to the courthouse. Lots of family records and histories got burnt up in those fires in the courthouse. I mean, there may have been an investigation and they're coming for an audit, and my goodness, the courthouse just happened to burn down and we don't have any records anymore. So, I mean, it's possible. But there are... we know the children of Israel existed because they survived and continued, but the details back this far into history are hard to recover. But it keeps seminary professors in Old Testament studies having jobs, doing research and writing papers and teaching classes. And they are coming up with a lot of good things that are helpful to us, like wagons doesn't mean four-wheeled covered wagons moving across the plains and toward the American West. They were the two-wheel carts that were common then. So we need to get the right images in our mind. Anyway, but the main thing that the narrator wants us to understand is God was at work here helping these people survive so that they could continue to preserve these stories that tell us about the nature of this God and how we should live with one another. And that's what we're trying to learn. Let us pray. Dear God, we thank you for all the ways you do bless us and for the real human beings who discovered your presence with them in the wilderness and in these primitive times and sought to grow in their knowledge and understanding and appreciation of who you were and how you are a blessing. In Christ's name, amen.